Embroidery Editing Essentials, Part 3, Personalizing an Applique Design. In the previous segment, we examined this simple 4x4 design, using it as an opportunity to explore all the different menu options and view options that there are for a design. But let's say we want to open up a different applique design and personalize it. I can go up to Open, and in this case, I want to open up this tow truck Shamrock design. When I click Open, you'll notice that I have a new tab. It's one of the things I love about Embrilliance is that you can have multiple tabs open, so you can be working on several projects at once. When you open a design, it comes zoomed in on the hoop that was currently selected, and that was a 4x4 hoop. And if I zoom out, what do you notice right away? This design does not fit in a 4x4 hoop. It's pretty obvious on the screen, but also Embrilliance gives me a warning down here in the bottom toolbar. It's highlighted in red, and that tells me this design does not fit in the selected hoop. So I need to change that. Let's go up to Preferences, and the first option is Hoops. Now hoops are sorted by machine format. I have a Brother embroidery machine, and so I would choose the PES format. Now hoops are always going to be listed in millimeters. That's just the way it is because those are the exact measurements that hoops are created in. You're going to need to memorize which hoops belong with your machine. For example, the 100 by 100 millimeter is my 4x4 hoop. If I have trouble remembering that, it is stated down here that it's approximately 4x4, but I can edit this hoop name, and I could put JT 4x4 in front of it to remind me that, hey, that's what my machine uses. But what I really want to use is, let's get my 5x7 hoop, and for me that is 130 by 180 millimeters. You'll see down here it's approximately 5x7, so let me edit that so it's reflected, JT 5x7. All right, so if I highlight that and click Apply, we'll see that it changed in the background. You see that my hoop size changed back there, and also my design's dimensions are no longer highlighted in red. So that means it fits in my hoop. Yay! Let's click OK. All right, so I've got this applique design, and just like on the previous segment, I can expand my object and see how this design works. I've got a placement and tack down stitch for the shamrock, a placement and tack down stitch for the truck, placement and tack down stitches for the tire, and then I start working through my details and satin stitches. So I've got the top light and then the headlight and the hook, the shamrock, the truck, and the tires. Okay, let's say I want to personalize this design. Now, be honest, if I'm going to add text to this, I don't want to turn my head 90 degrees. That's going to get awkward. So let's rotate this design. Let's take a look at some of the buttons that we have not examined yet in this video series. These two buttons allow me to rotate my design 90 degrees. I can go counterclockwise, I can go clockwise. You can also type in an exact measurement, so if I wanted to rotate something exactly 30 degrees, I could do that. If you don't like something that you've just done, you can always undo to set it back to where it was. There's also a couple buttons here that allow me to flip vertically, so I can flip it upside down, and to flip horizontally, so I can mirror it left and right. So I've rotated my design. Now, if you look down here again in the toolbar, you'll see that now my selected dimensions are highlighted in yellow. And that's just kind of a caution sign that says, hey, Janae, your design will fit in your 5x7 hoop, but it's not turned the right way. Right? So I can solve that problem by rotating my hoop as well. The easiest way to do that is to double click the word hoop in the bottom toolbar. And when I do that, it'll toggle back and forth between landscape and portrait. All right, so now if I zoom to hoop, I can get a better view of my tow truck. Now let's say I want to personalize this. The easiest way to personalize a design in Embrilliance is to use a lettering object. So let's click this A button to create a lettering object. Now you'll notice in my objects panel I have two different designs. I have my applique, and now I have my lettering object. When the applique is selected, this is what is down in my properties tab. I get my colors, and then there's also this stitches tab where I can adjust some density settings. When you have a lettering object selected, we have a new dialog box that allows us to type in text. So let's say I was going to personalize this for a little boy named Jacob. I can type his name and click set, and it appears on my screen. And the default text is always going to start with the built-in block font that is included with Essentials. If I wanted to use that font, then I could put his name here, or I could put his name down here. I can also change the font to something different. So if we click on this button to expand it, we'll see that there are 12 built-in fonts that come with Essentials. So I could use that font instead, and if it's a little too big, then I could just drag and drop a corner to resize it. And as you resize, watch that stitch count change, because Embrilliance is auto calculating the underlay and satin stitch and the density for its built-in fonts as you resize. So you can resize by dragging and dropping like that. You can also resize by typing an exact percent change to the top. So maybe I want this to be exactly 90% of the original. Or if you know exactly how wide you want it to be, maybe I only want it to be 30 millimeters wide. There are lots of different ways that you can resize. As long as this lock is in place, when you type in a number in the percentage, or if you type in a number in the measurements, then it will resize both the height and width proportionally. Same thing down here, if I'm dragging on a corner, it's going to resize it proportionally. Now you can choose to shift just one. So if I wanted to squash this, I could just change that dimension. And now if you look at the percentages, you'll see that they are no longer equal to each other. Let me just delete this and create a new lettering object. We'll reset everything back to 100%. Okay, I said there were 12 built-in fonts. There are 4 that are showing at the top of my list. The other fonts are at the very bottom of my list because I actually have hundreds of fonts from the Itch to Stitch installed here. Here we can see the rest of the fonts that are included with Essentials. So maybe I would want to choose Jazz or University. So you can see it's really easy to scroll through and find different options. But I actually want to use a font from the Itch to Stitch instead of using a built-in font. So let's say instead of putting his name on it, I just want to use his initial. So maybe just the letter J, and let's try closer to free, the 1-inch size. Maybe I just want to put a J inside the shamrock. Okay, that would be a cute way to personalize this design as well. What if I want to put a name below? Now on this design, it completely fills the 5x7 hoop. And so I don't really have space to add a name below this design. If I were limited to a 5x7 hoop, then I would have to rehoop it in order to stitch the name. But I actually am not limited to a 5x7 hoop. I also have a 6x10 hoop. So let's go back up here to the preferences, and I'm going to change to my 160 by 260 millimeter hoop. That's my 6x10. Let's add that real quick. So I'll click OK. Now I've got a little bit more room to play with this design. So I can move my tow truck up, and then it looks like, let's go ahead and move this back to inches. It looks like I've got about an inch worth of space to play with. So I could instead go ahead and type his name again, click set, and see what font I want to add his name with here at the bottom. Now that's pretty cute. Maybe Adipose Unicase. Right, that's really wide, which is a good font for short names, and so that might work for Jacob. Bridgetown is another one that's really popular for boys and girls, but it's a tall, skinny font, and so in this particular case, might work for a boy with a really long name, but Jacob is probably too short for this. How about Happy Giraffe? That's another one of my favorites. Okay, that's cute. So once you get settled on a font, you can choose to change its color. For example, maybe since this is for St. Patrick's Day, I would want to change it to that same green color. So when I go back to the lettering object, if I choose the color tab, when I click this button, it brings up my thread choices. Now you can choose a thread catalog, and so there are multiple thread brands available. For example, if you happen to use Marathon polyester, then this is going to be the thread catalog for you. If you use a different thread catalog, then you just select that. You can also choose palettes, and so what it will do is narrow down my thread options to the threads that are currently on my screen. So if I just want it to be the same green as the Shamrock, I can click OK to set that. Now let's get these spaced properly. I am a former math teacher, and so I love things to be mathematically centered and perfect. So let's select both these items. If I hold my Shift key down while I click on both of those, then I can select this button here, which is Align and Distribute. All right, let me move this window over here so we can see what we're doing. When you have multiple items selected, there are lots of different ways that you can align them. For example, we could align the left sides of them. Let me click Apply, and you can see that happen. So you see that the left side of the Shamrock is now lining up with the left side of the J. Or we could align their right sides. So now it's aligned over here in the front. Or we could align their centers. We could also choose to align their tops or their centers if we wanted to go right across the truck, or the bottom. But in this case, what I care most about, I really want Jacob to be down below. So let me close this real quick and drag that back. Let me undo my change. You can watch me bounce through all those. Let's go back to the aligning and make sure that I've got center selected. Okay. Now, this is mathematically centered. All right, I can center it in the hoop as well. And now that I've got it mathematically centered in the hoop and centered with each other, how does that look? One thing I like to do, like I told you earlier, is that you can hit the G key to hide the grid and the H key to hide the hoop, and kind of get a preview of what this might look like on a t-shirt. And does that name look right? It doesn't look right to me. Now, it's mathematically centered, but if you stitch this for a friend and hand it to her, I don't know that she's going to get a ruler out and measure it and praise you for how well you mathematically centered the name under the truck. She's going to think that looks a little off, because where should it really be? It looks like the truck needs to scoot over so that the name Jacob is centered more underneath the tires instead of the entire truck. Let's turn our grid and hoop back on. Why is it happening? If we look very carefully, it's because this Shamrock is sticking off the edge of the truck. Let's highlight that truck again, and we'll see that there is a lot more space between the box around this design and the left tire than there is around the right side of the box and the right tire. So this is a case where we need to visually center something. All right, I've already got the name centered in the hoop, so now what I need to do is I'm just going to kind of watch the tires here and see if they are approximately centered over the hoop, and I think that's probably a pretty decent position right there. So once it looks centered, that's what's visually pleasing to me. It really doesn't matter that the Shamrock is dangling off the edge just a little bit. Now that I've got it positioned the way I want, I can save this. So we want to go up and File and Save As, because we don't want to save it over the original design file name. If I'm personalizing it, I want to save it as two different things. I'm actually going to choose Save as Stitch and Working File. Now the stitch file is what I will need at my embroidery machine. So I could name this Jacob Shamrock Truck. And down here I will pick my machine format. Again, I use a Brother machine, so I'm going to choose PES, but you can choose from any of these machine formats. And then saved in the background was also a .be file, which is a working file. And that's what I could use to reopen this design if, say, next year Jacob's little brother Caleb wants a shirt, then I'll be able to quickly personalize it for him as well. Let's open up that design we just saved. Let's go to Open, and let's open that PES file that we just saved. We'll see when we get our thumbnail image here, it looks like everything's centered perfectly, but when I open this up, notice that it opens up off center. All right, it looks off center. It's actually opening exactly centered, because when Embrilliance saves a design, it saves it mathematically centered to the hoop. It's not really going to take into account that you had offset it on purpose to be visually pleasing. So what are you going to do? Well, there's a couple things you could do. You could, like we talked about in the previous segment, you could go up and you could print a template of this and then lay it on your object and intentionally hoop your object slightly off center to compensate for it. Although sometimes I forget to do that. So the other thing we could do is go back to our working file and add a basting stitch. So while I have both items selected, I'm going to go up to Utility and choose Base Design. And what that has done is added a rectangle that's just ever so slightly bigger than my full design space. Okay, now when that basting stitch is in place, you can tell that I really do have my design off center, don't I? What I need to do is change the size of this basting stitch. So if we look carefully, this side, the left side of the design, is a little past 3.5 inches from center. So I'm going to grab this and drag it to a little past 3.5 inches off center. So it looks pretty centered there. All right, and now I'm going to center just that. I've got that basting stitch selected, so if I click center, it'll center that in the hoop. And now when I save my designs, let's go up to Save Stitch and Working. Let's change this to Basted. Now if I open up that newly saved file, we'll see that the truck and the word and the name Jacob stay positioned in the hoop where I want, because that basting stitch is providing the centering part, and so it forces the design to stay positioned exactly where I want. Now if I take this to my machine, I actually probably would skip the basting stitch step. We'll see here that it's all been joined together into one object. Let's go back to that working file real quick. See how I had 3 objects? I had the basting stitch, and I had the tow truck, and I had the lettering object. Well, in my PES file that's been saved, it's all been joined as one object. I would probably skip this step at my machine and just use it to make sure that my design lands positioned where I want when I center my hoop on my shirt. All right, so what we've done is we've opened up an applique design and personalized it by adding a lettering object and adding a basting stitch to help make sure that we position an off-center design in a pleasing way. In the next segment, we will examine further editing tools to help us create a completely custom design.